Oh, good warm up. Hello, everyone. We've been waiting 100 years for this get together. I hope you all have programs. You'll notice that there seem to be two programs. The one on your left, as you open it up, is the original from 100 years ago, and the one on the right is the one we're using today. And a few things have changed in 100 years. For one thing, 100 years ago, when we had this ceremony, there was no microphone, there were no TV cameras, and as one person pointed out, no Starbucks across the street. But one thing was here, and that's a very special monument, a rock, if you want to call it that we've all looked at if you've been in this Sylvester Park from time to time, but probably walked by it and didn't even think much about it. But it commemorated the struggles, the difficulties people had just getting to Olympia 100 years ago. There was no national road. We had railroads, but no highways, so it was difficult to get here. In fact, you might even have to come in something like Ezra Meeker's wagon back there. I hope you've had a chance to look at it and that you'll have a chance to look at it a little bit more. It's 1913 now. The income tax came into existence in this year. Woodrow Wilson was president. Henry Ford was just starting his assembly line to pump out those Model A's, Model T's. Things were starting to change. Well, as we get our program underway, one thing I want to do is have a message here from our current governor, Governor Inslee, and to deliver that message, Senator Karen Fraser. I'll be the mic adjuster.
If anybody knows mics, Dick does.
Not really, I just talk into him. Okay, Robert, how do I get this one down?
Okay, I'll just stand tall. Okay, well, good morning, everybody. It is an honor and a pleasure to be here to bring greetings from Governor Jay Inslee. He says, I am pleased to extend warm greetings to all of those attending today's centennial rededication of the end of the Oregon Trail marker, sponsored by the Sacajawea chapter of the National Society of the Daughters of the American Revolution. Today's exciting recreation of the 1913 dedication ceremony will feature original speeches that have been preserved in the archives, as well as period music and dress, and an authentic covered wagon, which was originally owned by prominent pioneer Ezra Meeker. This special ceremony will be a memorable event for the whole family, and I applaud the Sacajawea chapter for its dedicated efforts in recreating this moment in history and for its ongoing commitment to promoting citizenship, patriotism, and American history education. Thank you all for coming, and please accept my best wishes for a fun and engaging event. Very truly yours, Jay Inslee, Governor.
Thank you very much, Senator Fraser. And now it is my pleasure to read to have the City of Olympia's proclamation read by the mayor himself, Mayor Steve Bucksbaum, who's coming up to the podium here. Mayor, welcome to the event.
Okay. Thank you, Dick, and welcome everybody to a beautiful morning. Thanks very much to the Sacajawea chapter of the Daughters of the American Revolution for organizing all this. I'll begin by reading my proclamation. Whereas the end of the Oregon Trail is memorialized at Sylvester Park with a plaque installed in 1913, with Ezra Meeker, Governor Lister, and other dignitaries in attendance. And whereas the Sacajawea chapter, Daughters of the American Revolution, in recognition of the 100th anniversary of the installation of said monument, wish to reenact the original program and rededicate the monument on June 15, 2013, And whereas the Sacajawea chapter, Daughters of the American Revolution, have invited representatives from government and private entities and dignitaries to reenact the original program, including speeches of the honored guests, and whereas the wagon used by Ezra Meeker will be on exhibit to further embellish the event, band music will play, children will sing patriotic songs. Now therefore, be it resolved that I, Stephen Buxbaum, Mayor of the City of Olympia, do hereby proclaim Saturday, June 15, 2013, as Centennial Rededication Day of the end of the Oregon Trail marker in the City of Olympia.
Thank you very much, Mayor. Some people asked, how could there be, is this really the end of the Oregon Trail? In fact, I think Mayor Buxbaum asked that very question of me. And the answer is yes. When the trail ended, there were all these little splinters around. Like, you know, when they got to the end, they went here, they went there, and this is one of the places. So this is one of the ends of the Oregon Trail. I would like to introduce some very special guests who are here with us, and I'm going to ask them to stand and remain standing, and then after I introduce them, we can give them one big round of applause. I know Washington State Daughters of American Revolution Regent of Spokane is here, Janelle Braithwaite. Would you stand, Janelle, please? And please, Washington State Senator Karen Fraser, please remain standing until I get everybody introduced. And you've already met Senator Fraser, and she's part of the group here. Former Secretary of State Sam Reed, it's an honor to have you here, my good friend, and retired Justice of the Supreme Court, State Supreme Court, Gary Alexander. Thank you for being here. And Virgil Clarkson, Mayor of Lacey, I don't see him. He's got an honored chair, but Mayor Buxbaum, would you stand again, please? It's an honor to have you here. Tumwater Mayor Pete Comet, I don't see you, but he's here in spirit. Olympia Councilwoman Janine Rowe, are you here, Janine? All right. And also, there are a number of you who are descendants of pioneers who have a relative from 1913 or earlier. Would you please stand up if you're able? Or raise your hand if you're not. And remain standing, please. Now, there are a number of people here who are Oregon Trail descendants. So if you're an Oregon Trail descendant in any way, would you please stand if you're able? All right. And I want to thank, if you're a representative of a historical society, would you please stand? And there are a number of those. And Janelle, by the way, is statewide regent to the DAR. I should point that out. All right, and then one lady that I really am honored to have, and I am sure that you will agree that the spotlight should be on her, and that's Lila Jones. Lila is right here in the front, sitting on the walker. Would you wave your hand, Lila? She'll be 102 years old this November, was it? This year she'll be hitting 102, and if you get a chance to talk to her, she's a fantastic lady, and she played in this park as a kid and remembers there was a little pond here and a drinking fountain and all that, and this was one of her favorite places to go, and you want to talk to her. Those memories are precious. She was born right here in this area to a pioneer family, and she could have actually attended the original ceremony, but you were about 1 year old, 1.5 then, so you don't remember if you were here or not. She is a true pioneer. She was born in a log house built by her grandparents in the Black Lake area. Her mother's family arrived here in 1881 at Barnes Lake. So let's give a big hand to everyone, all these special celebrities, and especially Lila for being here. Thank you. Thank you so much. All right, you may be seated, those of you standing, which is a lot of you. People keep asking me if I'm a, pioneer, and I look like I should be, but I'm not, unfortunately. But Lila went to Olympia High School. That's my alma mater, too, and I knew Justice Alexander there. So she graduated in 1930. All right, speaking of local schools, we have some music here sung by a choir from Lincoln School. The DAR kids are also with them. And would you, you'll be moving into place here. We have Addie Barker, Layla Chavez, Katie Davis, Jackie DeHay, Helena Scuderi, Zoe Scuderi, Francis Sharp, Aiden Winstead, and Elena Winstead. Julia Chavez is the director. Enjoy. That's Winstead Cody. Kobe. Thank you so very much. One more. Thank you very much. Most from Lincoln Elementary School. It is my honor now to introduce the regent of the statewide DAR, Janelle Braithwaite, who will lead us in the Lord's Prayer.
Will you join me in saying the Lord's Prayer? Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptations, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen.
There are a few empty chairs, and if you need to sit down and would like to, and you see one that nobody's sitting in, feel free to use that chair for yourself. Many of the short speeches that you hear are exactly the way they were given 100 years ago. Fortunately, they left a lot of records back then, and the local chapter of the DAR did a lot of research and found out what was actually said. At this time, I would like to introduce Mrs. Streets. Well, Mrs. Streets really isn't here, but you can pretend that she is. She was the 1913 regent of DAR. She attended Stanford University and worked as a researcher at the State Library in Olympia. She's married to Ralph Streets. Yeah. Our former Secretary of State, Sam Reed, knows about the State Library. It's under the Secretary of State's office. And her husband worked for the West Side Lumber Mill on West Bay Drive. Susie Scuderi will be representing Mrs. Streets.
We have gathered together to make with enduring granite and bronze a historic The End of the Oregon Trail. Before proceeding with these exercises, a few words of introduction and explanation would seem appropriate. It is not my purpose to touch upon the history of the trail itself, but rather to indicate why we women are concerned in the dedication of this monument. The Society of the Daughters of the American Revolution is deeply interested in maintaining and fostering the spirit of love and devotion to country that has so strongly dominated our ancestors, and we believe that a powerful influence in that direction may be provided by the marking of places of historic interest and the restoration and preservation of objects of historical value. The Daughters are well organized in every state of the Union, but find their greatest numerical strength and scope in those eastern states which are carved from the old colonies. They are rich indeed in places consecrated by the self-sacrifices and heroism of our ancestors. We of the West cannot mark a Valley Forge or a Bunker Hill, but we can perpetuate the trails of an exodus greater than that of Israel, the pathways trod by those who traveled the Oregon Trail. The Daughters of this America believe that it is possible to preserve for a generation more appreciative than our own the history and location of these famous trails, now in danger of degeneration, and have advocated a project to convert them into national highways extending from ocean to ocean. This highway would include the old Cumberland Road, the Boone Lick Road, the Santa Fe Trail, Kearney's Road, and the Oregon Trail. 17 states are traversed by these pioneer highways. The DAR of 4 Midwestern states have already erected by state appropriation and their one effort stone monuments marking the Santa Fe Trail from Missouri to New Mexico, a distance of almost 1,000 miles. The Society in the East is active in preserving and marking the roads of our own states. The importance of the work of our own Mr. Meeker on behalf of the Oregon Trail cannot be overstated. His journey by ox team of 1,500 miles from this city to Washington City over these old trails was of vital importance to the preservation of the location of the Oregon route and is still in our minds. At the beginning of the Oregon Trail has been placed a monument by the Missouri Daughters of the Revolution. Here and at this time, the Sacajawea chapter of the Daughters of the American Revolution present to the state this boulder of native granite and our tablet of bronze to mark the end of the Oregon Trail. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. At this time, I would like to introduce our governor. Well, the governor from 1913, Governor Ernest Lister. He was actually from England and was our only foreign-born governor. And he helped bring the 8-hour workday to the Pacific Northwest, pretty advanced for 100 years ago. And to represent Governor Lister, and with his actual speech, again, I'd like to introduce Senator Karen Fraser. And would you like to hold the mic, or I could hold it for you?
Well, thank you, Dick, and it's an honor to represent Governor Lister, the 8th governor when Washington was only 24 years old as a state. Unfortunately, there are no archival records of Governor Lister's speech, so I have tried to think about what he probably would have said. So that is what I will present to you today. And I'd like to further introduce Governor Lister. He, at age 23, he became a member of the Tacoma City Council. He was a very active business person in Tacoma. He managed the gubernatorial campaign of John Rogers, who successfully was elected governor, and Olympia High School is named after him. And then later, Mr. Lister became governor. He started out as a member of the Populist Party and later became a Democrat. And in addition to the 8-hour workday, another notable thing he did was veto legislation that would have denied civil rights to members of the International Workers of the World, known as Wobblies. And you may recall there was a lot of turmoil associated with their efforts to improve labor relations. So anyway, what might Governor Lister have said? So here's my recreation. Good day, ladies and gentlemen of the South Puget Sound area. A special welcome to older people here today who actually endured the hardships of the Oregon Trail to start new lives and to successfully settle and grow this wonderful area. A special welcome to descendants of the Oregon Trail pioneers who continue to make Washington State and Puget Sound such a pleasant and vibrant place to live. And a special welcome to the Daughters of the American Revolution who envisioned the importance of remembering their achievements. So the purpose of today is to express in a permanent way our appreciation for the quality of character, the hardiness, and perseverance of the pioneers who successfully endured the Oregon Trail, and endurance was really part of it, to reach South Puget Sound, which was then Smithfield in the Oregon Territory, and to build new lives and communities. It's important to appreciate what these hardy pioneers accomplished to get here. They came before the railroads. They traveled for months by wagon and much of the time by walking, moving westward at 11 to 17 miles per day to get here, surviving innumerable hazards from uncomfortable and dangerous travel. Visualize sitting in a bouncing wagon like that. That's why a lot of them walked. They survived cholera, illness, food shortages, weather, uncertain encounters with native peoples, and much, much more. And they came to our area by two extensions of the Oregon Trail. One was called the Cowlitz Trail, which came to this area up from Vancouver, and the other was the Natchez Trail, which came over to this area from Walla Walla over the Cascade Mountains. And many stayed here. Others traded in their wagons and their animals to board boats and go further north in Puget Sound. Where did they come from? Mostly from the Midwest or the Mid-South. And interestingly, they constituted about 20% of those who reached Oregon on the trail after 1846. And about 20,000 Washingtonians came across the Oregon Trail. So we who live here today should be most appreciative of their vision and hard work in beginning the building of the community we enjoy today. They founded economic activity, they established cities and towns, they financed and built public infrastructure, they founded a wide variety of political, civic, and cultural institutions, and developed the foundations of our community life. They made our area the hub of economic activity north of Vancouver, which was then the hub of basically Pacific Northwest activity, thus contributing to our area becoming the territorial capital, contributing to the justification for Washington becoming a state separate from Oregon, and contributing to Olympia ultimately becoming the state capital. So their foundational work in establishing this blessed community will benefit countless generations. So the marker is a very sturdy structure, very fitting reminder of their own sturdiness. Strong and enduring as are their personalities. And it's very appropriate that this Oregon Trail commemoration is placed in Sylvester Park, named after another Oregon Trail pioneer who was a major leader in founding the area. So it's an honor to be asked by the Daughters of the American Revolution to represent Governor Lister here today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Fraser, and anybody who knows Senator Karen Fraser knows that if there's one person who really cares about the preservation of history amongst the legislators, it would just about have to be Senator Fraser. She's involved, especially women's history, which is quite interesting. That she's fantastic on knowing how to do this. There was a University of Washington 100 years ago, and there was a professor up there, Professor Meany. And he was asked to write a sonnet for this event but he couldn't be here to deliver it in person, but he did actually write the sonnet. Now, even though we don't have all the speeches and everything, we have most of the material, including this sonnet, which I guarantee is the one that Professor Meany wrote. But an interesting thing, Professor Meany couldn't attend, so instead, DAR Regent Emma Chadwick read it. And she was the wife of Supreme Court Justice Chadwick. And we have her great-granddaughter with us right now. Back there, would you wave your hand right now? That is Chris Sabo. And we're honored to have you here today. And do you know that the recently retired Chief Justice Gary Alexander is just a few feet away from you? And I hope that the two of you will meet and talk because you have some things in common. So, Justice Alexander, I hope you'll have time to chat with Chris a little later on. Anyway, representing Emma Chadwick is Gretchen Bork, and she has the actual sonnet, so listen to the words carefully.
Thank you so much for that lovely introduction. I am sorry that Professor Meany from the University of Washington could not attend our wonderful program today. I must say that I am delighted to be asked to recite his lovely sonnet. He not only wrote the sonnet for this event, but he also dedicated it to us, the ladies of Sacajawea chapter, Daughters of the American Revolution. As you know, I am the outgoing regent of the Sacajawea chapter of Olympia, Washington, and I am honored that you requested that I do this oral presentation, which is very fitting for today's event. Thank you, Professor Meany. Before I start, I have an introduction, and she already has been introduced, but I would like to please introduce my great-granddaughter, Chris Sabo, attending this grand event. Please wave to the crowd, my dear. Okay, that's enough waving, thank you. I am now honored for your pleasure and enlightenment to read Professor Meany's sonnet, The End of the Oregon Trail. Fair Oregon, what brave men bade thee hail, when first their eyes held thy templed hills, thy verdant plains, and ere thy crystal rills, that threw their silver threads athwart thy trail. Such men do dare they knew but not fail. The time true courage forest nectar stills, exudant wine of winds that strangely thrills, the soul of quest of rough-hewn woodland grail. And now we gaze from rugged range to range. We mark as holy ground the paths they crossed. Sweet flowers we pluck amid the billowed sod, uncovered strand amidst the ruthless change. To greet each pioneer, nor count it strange, our hearts should melt with his in praise of God. Thank you, Professor Meany.
At this time, Judge Ellis gave some brief comments. And a few years down the road, about 3 or so, he became Chief Justice of the Washington State Supreme Court and served from 1917 to 1918. And he was a two-term president of the Sons of the American Revolution. At this time, I'd like to introduce Judge Ellis as presented by Russ Pringle.
Thanks to the DAR for asking me to represent Judge Ellis. That's Overton Gentry Ellis. I would love to give the speech he gave 100 years ago, but the speech is lost to history. It seems that Judge Ellis broke one of the rules of genealogy, and that rule is that before you throw it out, make a copy of it, because you're going to need it. Of course, he was hampered by the fact that Mr. Xerox and his magic machine hadn't shown up yet. Judge Ellis was born in Nottoway County, Missouri in 1860 and died in November 1940 in Tacoma, Washington, and is buried in Kansas City, Missouri. Judge Ellis earned his law degree from the University of Virginia Law School in 1885. He worked for the District Attorney's Office in Kansas City and then worked for the Lombard Investment Company in Kansas City. In 1892, he resigned his position and moved to Tacoma, Washington, where he started his own law practice. In 1910, Judge Ellis, a Democrat, was selected by Republican Governor Marion E. Hay to the state Supreme Court. This was the first time a governor had crossed party lines to make a Supreme Court appointment. Judge Ellis was recommended by many fellow lawyers from many parts of the state. In 1912, he won election to a full 6-year term, and he became Chief Justice in 1917. But in 1918, he decided not to run for re-election and returned to his law practice in Tacoma. Judge Ellis was a member of the Alexander Hamilton chapter of the Sons of the American Revolution, being admitted on November 23rd, 1898. Now for a little history of the SAR. In 1876, an organization was formed called the Sons of Revolutionary Sires. Out of the Sires grew the National Society of the Sons of the American Revolution, which was organized on April 30th, 1889. The National Society was chartered by an act of the U.S. Congress in 1906, and the charter was signed by President Theodore Roosevelt, who was an SAR member. The SAR has grown to 535 chapters in all 50 states, and Canada, France, Germany, Spain, Switzerland, and the United Kingdom. There are about 30,000 members. We are a lot smaller than the DAR with 170,000 members, something like that, and 3,000 chapters, but we're a year and a half older. The Washington Society of the SAR was founded in 1895, and the Alexander Hamilton chapter, of which I am the current president, was founded on February 15th, 1896. So, gentlemen, if you have a mother, grandmother, aunt, or great-aunt who was or is a DAR member, you can be fast-tracked into the SAR, and we can help you on the journey. Thank you.
At this time, I would like to introduce a fellow by the name of Mr. Gilstrap. He was with the Washington State Historical Society, a well-known artist, and one of the founders of the Washington State Historical Society, and was its first curator. And representing him, my good friend, Don Trosper.
Thank you. I hope you'll allow me to don my spectacles. I find in this modern age of 1913, I am needing these to see with, so I will put these on. All right, Sacajawea chapter, Daughters of the American Revolution, ladies and gentlemen. I am pleased to be present on such an occasion as this. These occasions mark epochs in history and become in themselves a part of that history. This, as I understand it, commemorates the advent of the first actual pioneer settlers to Puget Sound, thereby extending the old Oregon Trail to this spot. The marking of this and similar historic spots is preserving for coming generations cornerstones in history and teaching the public patriotism and reverence for the pioneers who, by their self-denials and hardships, laid the foundation of this great commonwealth which we now enjoy. As it is well understood, the old Oregon Trail, as it is now called, extended from the Missouri River to Port Vancouver. In 1844, Michael Simmons crossed the plains to Oregon, and he, with 5 other families and 2 unmarried men, settled in October 1845 in this vicinity around Tumwater, making the first settlement on Puget Sound. The following year, Mr. Simmons built the first grist mill on Puget Sound here at Tumwater. The millstones were chiseled out of granite boulders found on the beach and were intact and in good condition until 3 or 4 years ago. I was informed of the matter and made an effort to secure them for the State Historical Society, but upon investigation I found that a few weeks before someone had committed the sacrilege of breaking them to pieces to be used in the foundation of an ordinary building, thus losing to history a fine example of the ingenuity and perseverance of the pioneers. In 1847, the first sawmill on Puget Sound and the first in Washington was built here at Tumwater Falls by men whose names are probably familiar to many of you old settlers. Michael Simmons, Edmund Sylvester, Frank Shaw, A.B. Rabison, Gabriel Jones, Jesse Ferguson, John Kindred, and A.B. Carnifex were the builders, and they were important factors in the development of this region. The Oregon Trail, famous as it now is, was at the time from the Columbia River north merely an Indian trail. Mrs. Margaret Shazer, now of Roy, this state, and mother of the president of the Thurston County Pioneer Society, informed me that she came with her husband to the territory in 1847. They came up the Cowlitz River in a canoe, and at some of the more rocky places along the river, she was obliged to get out and carry her child along the banks of the streams. Leaving the river, they stopped at Chehalis, remaining there until the spring of 1848. They then started for Nisqually Bottom, coming over the trail to Tumwater, cutting logs and rolling them to one side, making their wagon road as they came. Grandma Shazer, as she is now affectionately known, is a true Sacajawea. As far as I know, she's the only lady that actually, with her own hands, helped to build the Oregon Trail to her future home. To appreciate the indomitable courage and perseverance of the pioneer spirit, I want to say to those of you who have not yet met Grandma Shazer that she was unassuming in her manner, and to look at her, one would think her certainly unfit for road building in the forests. In 1857, the Natchez Emigrant Trail crossed the Cascades, coming over the Natchez River. Following that, crossing back and forth 68 times before coming through the famous Natchez Pass. The descent from the summit was more than 1,000 feet, and at an angle of 60 degrees. So steep and rugged was this hill that the people and stock had to zigzag their way down to the bottom with great care. The wagons had to be let down over this cliff by means of ropes, and as there was not enough rope to reach the bottom, James Biles said, "Kill one of the poorest of my steers and make a rope of its hide, and if that is not enough, kill another." 3 animals were slaughtered before the rope was made long enough to reach a point where the oxen could be hitched to the wagons. From here on, they attached small logs with projecting limbs to the rear of the wagons, and at last reached a camping spot. This was the largest and perhaps the most remarkable emigrant train that ever came direct to Puget Sound. In this party, there were 156 persons, bringing with them numbers of cattle and horses and 36 wagons, 2 of which were destroyed in the descent on this famous Natchez Hill. I want to call your attention to this fact that this was not a road in any sense. It was simply an Indian trail through the forest. They had to cut their way day by day, some days not traveling more than a mile. The Daughters of the American Revolution make their cornerstone love of country and the preservation of the heroic deeds of our forefathers, not only in the colonial states, but throughout the nation. I am pleased that this chapter, along with others in the state, are taking an active interest and doing their share in the good work. We hope that this work of education will go on until we can send men and women to the legislature who have an appreciation of things sacred and patriotic, to that degree that they will also assist historical and patriotic institutions that the rising generation will be taught to love and respect the work that our pioneer fathers have done. First, by securing the Oregon country without conquest of arms, and second, by laying the foundation of this great commonwealth, which we believe to be unsurpassed by any other, either in natural resources or historic lore. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Our flag wants attention. In fact, I should have pointed out that in 1913, we just added a star about a year earlier when Arizona became a state. And so I didn't count the stars on this flag, but I know there's at least one here that has 48 stars on it. And is that 48-star flag? So glad the flag called attention to me. It says, hey, I'm special. Speaking of special, Mayor Pete Comet from Tumwater, glad you're here. Wave your hand. There he is. Stand up. That's even better. Thank you. Your horse lost his shoe. All right. Well, apology accepted. Glad you're here. So, at this time, before we're going to find out a little bit more about Ezra Meeker in just a little bit, but we have time for a Stephen Foster medley from the Boomer Brass Quintet. Thank you, Boomer Brass Quintet. We are honored as we wind our way down towards the grand finale of our 1-hour celebration here, Reenactment. It is my pleasure to introduce Dennis Larson, Pacific Northwest historian and author, who will now tell us more about the guy who's mentioned on that covered wagon there, Ezra Meeker. Dennis Larson, thank you.
By February 1913, Ezra Meeker had been 8 years on his work of honoring the early pioneers of the Northwest and saving the memory of the Oregon Trail, over which he and thousands of others had passed. In 1905, he published Pioneer Reminiscences and The Tragedy of Leschi, a magnificent history of the early days of Washington Territory. That year, he took a covered wagon and ox team to the Lewis and Clark Exposition held in Portland, Oregon. Here was born the idea of retracing the route of the Oregon Trail and marking it with stone monuments. In 1906, at age 75, Meeker struck out over the trail against the advice of many, including his own children. He was 3 years on this journey. He arrived in Washington, D.C. in November 1907, where he met President Theodore Roosevelt and recruited him to sign on to the project. Here he also began lobbying the United States Congress to first mark the trail and then to build a national highway along its route to be called Pioneer Way. In 1910, he repeated the cross-country trek, staying out on the road until 1912, educating the public and pressing everyone he could to join his effort. One group proved quite sympathetic to his cause, the Daughters of the American Revolution. Meeker first contracted this organization in Kansas and Missouri in the summer of 1906. At that time, the local chapters in these states were hard at work marking the Santa Fe Trail as part of the National DAR Old Trails and Roads project. And they were unable to help him. While sympathetic, they were unable to help him until a few years later. But just as soon as possible, they turned their attention to marking the Oregon Trail. In February 1910, the Fort Kearny chapter of the DAR set a beautiful granite marker in that city, the first stone marker in the state of Nebraska. In 1912, Mrs. Reed, the Washington State Regent, traveled to the nation's capital to testify in front of the Senate, urging them to come aboard. In early 1913, Mrs. H.B. Patton, the Wyoming DAR State Regent, began writing Meeker soliciting his advice about the efforts to mark the trail in their state. Here in Washington State, events moved a bit slower. In 1906, Meeker and the citizens of Tenino placed a stone marker in that city, the first along the entire Oregon Trail as far as research has been able to determine. And there matters stood until 1913. What did Tenino have to do with the Oregon Trail, you may ask? A good question. The Oregon Trail, contrary to common perception, was not a single track across the country with one beginning and one end. It may best be described as a rope frayed at both ends. These frays at the beginning and end represented the many locations from which the pioneers began and ended their journey west. Such widespread cities as the Dalles, Oregon City, and Portland all have monuments declaring their towns to also be the end of the Oregon Trail. There were several threads of that frayed rope leading to Washington. The Cowlitz Trail wound its muddy way from Portland to Olympia via Tenino, following what today is called Capitol Way in Olympia. Another thread came over Natchez Pass and ended near Stellicum. A third thread was the water route down the Columbia and up through the Straits of Juan de Fuca to Puget Sound. In 1913, the Sacajawea chapter of the DAR decided to mark this end of that frayed rope. The call to mark the trail first came from O.G. Ellis, state president of the Sons of the American Revolution, in his annual address. But nothing happened until the Olympia ladies decided to act. By the end of 1916, the sons and daughters of the American Revolution had marked the Cowlitz Trail from Vancouver to Olympia with 11 stone markers to accompany that lonely Tenino stone. And by the way, all these markers are still standing, and in 2006, 2 more were added to the mix in Chehalis and Clequedo. When Ezra Meeker came to Olympia in February 1913, the United States Congress had placed $6 million in a fund to at last build a transcontinental highway, the Lincoln Highway. But it was a highway that would not follow the route of the Oregon Trail. And to make matters worse, the Washington State Legislature had named the highway following the route of the Cowlitz Trail the Pacific Highway. It proposed naming the route over Chinook Pass Pioneer Way as sort of a consolation prize to Meeker and his efforts. To suggest that Meeker was unhappy with these decisions would be a vast understatement. He had been battling for a decade for his National Pioneer Way. Here in Olympia on February 22nd, 1913, he had a small but important victory. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Ezra Manning Meeker.
I want to thank you, ladies, for this invitation to speak on the occasion of the dedication of this memorial tablet, which will perpetuate the memory of the Oregon Trail and honor all the pioneers who attempted the journey. I'm particularly gratified to know that you've undertaken this work, being that it is right in line with the effort to mark the Oregon Trail from Olympia to the Missouri River, 2,200 miles, over which, I might add, I have traveled thrice. First time with an ox team, and twice from Olympia to the Missouri River, and thence on to Washington City, erecting monuments on the Oregon Trail, or rather, getting the people to act. 31 granite monuments now attest to the interest taken by the citizens in various places along the trail in the 6 states through which that great highway passes. Now, even as I stand here before you, the organization of the DAR in Kansas City, Missouri is at work on the Kansas branch of the Oregon Trail. While at Council Bluffs, the people have taken measures preparing to erect a splendid monument at their end of the trail. In addition to this, the DAR are continuing the work in Nebraska and have erected a number of monuments. You ladies of the DAR may be justly proud. In my recent trip in 19 and 10, I traced this great trail for nearly 1,500 miles. It's one of the greatest trails in history, my friends. It's a trail of the greatest tragedies as well. Some 300,000 people passed over the trail in the lapse of the 25 years or so that it was in use. Thus, I want to again thank you ladies of the DAR, for taking up this work of such transcendent importance. And you clearly realize that as reverence for the past dies out in the breasts of a generation, so likewise patriotism wanes. And if we wish to keep the flame of patriotism alive in America, we must keep the memory of the past vividly in our minds. Now, let us at this juncture take a moment for a retrospective look into the time of pioneer days. I'll select just two. Old Mike Simmons, as he came to be called. He came up from the Columbia River, dragging his belongings on a sled. He and his party came to Tumwater, then named, as you know, Newmarket. In 1845, they founded the first permanent American settlement north of the Columbia River. Oh, I know Jackson was south of us here, but I'm talking about the first American settlement. Now, it was said that Simmons was illiterate, couldn't sign his name or read a book. But you know, he achieved his life's experience. That gave him education. He first began here as a shingle maker for Hudson Bay Company, then a mill builder on the falls of the Deschutes, ship owner, Indian superintendent, other activities full of enterprise, often meeting sore disappointments without dismay. This was old Mike Simmons, my friends. Oh, and George Bush, a colored man, he came over at the same time. It's related of Bush, and I know this to be true, that he put a false bottom in his wagon bed, nailed it firmly down, and therein he hid some 100 pounds of silver, some $2,000. He brought it all the way safely to his homestead here. We now call it Bush Prairie, don't we? He was a man to be respected in any community, regardless of his color. I can testify to his altruistic actions in aiding the pioneers who came up here to Puget Sound in those years, 18 and 52 and 18 and 53, in such great numbers. Food was scarce. And what did this man do? He shared his food with those pioneers. Come and get your necessary supply and repay in kind when you can, he said, all the while refusing to sell for cash to speculators who came here with the gold and the silver with which to buy. Those were our early pioneers, my friends. But we must needs also recall to memory those who did not complete the journey. They were buried all along that trail. The number of casualties in that army of immigrants, well, I hesitate to guess. Shall we say 10% fell on the way? There were places, my friends, where their graves appeared to be always in sight. In my mind's eye, I can see them now. Mere mounds of sand without head or footboards, as lumber was to be obtained only by cutting from a wagon. And there was never a stone for hundreds of miles to mark those graves. They became so common as to cause no comment. But one day, a little further from the road, just above the low sagebrush, something like a blue flag was seen. On going to it, we found a woman's sunbonnet on a headboard split from the end gate of a wagon bed, marking a grave. By the smaller board at the other end were placed a pair of women's shoes. On that headboard, in pencil, printed apparently by a child's hand, was the word mother. But mostly those heroic pioneers who laid down were buried forever in lonely, unmarked graves. And so we must need perpetuate their memory and the memory of all of those who completed the journey by naming what is presently known as Pacific Highway to be hereafter known as Pioneer Way. From Olympia here all the way to Vancouver, and then easterly from Vancouver to the Cascades of the Columbia by the village of Stevenson. Now, my friends, I appeared before the Washington legislature just 2 weeks ago asking that this be granted. But today, I find in Senate Bill number 312 that the name Pacific Highway is attached to the route over which the pioneers had passed from the Columbia River to Puget Sound. And that instead of granting the request as made, why, the committee has decreed, and I'm quoting from the bill now, another branch shall take off where road number 1 leaves the American River, and shall follow said American River by the most feasible route to a connection with the Rainier National Park. This highway and its branches to be known as the Pioneer Highway. Huh. Now, ladies, this is inappropriate, completely inappropriate. First, no pioneers ever passed over this proposed road to be named Pioneer Highway, if there is such a road in existence, which is doubtful. This route, as proposed by the Legislative Committee, lies in the Cascade Mountains, where the road would be an unimportant highway with but few to pass over it. Ladies, I believe the pioneers are entitled to a front seat. I believe they're entitled to have the name Pioneer Way attached to the most important highway in this state. Now we're striving to get the legislature to change the bill and give us the name Pioneer Way as we have asked. And if that change is made, we want to at once take the matter in hand and establish milestones or mileposts, as the case may be, each to be marked Pioneer Way. Now, many people look upon this suggestion as a mere whim. One person said it was a fad, but it has a deeper meaning than this. Let me explain. You see, if we get this official name from Olympia to the Cascades on the Columbia River, then we'll take it in hand in Oregon, and we'll get the Oregon legislature to extend the name over the Oregon Trail in Oregon. And then that would go as far as Fort Boise. From that point on, we would propose to get the Idaho legislature to act and extend the name across Idaho to Montpelier, thence across Wyoming, through the South Pass, over the Rocky Mountains, and so on to the western line of Nebraska. And can you see that road, you see? And then down the Platte in Nebraska to Council Bluffs, or maybe to the older branch by way of the Big or Little Blue Rivers to Independence, or as it's now known as Kansas City. Do you see what we're trying to accomplish here? Now, ladies, I want to ask you to take up this work in our grand Commonwealth of Washington. It's a noble work which you have undertaken so far, and now may not we hope the Spirit will move you to continue? to the end that we may soon have a marked pioneer way, which in the no distant future will be a great highway, over which the throngs may pass over the whole length of the Oregon Trail, from the Missouri to Olympia here. I've packed my blankets on my back over the proposed Pioneer Way, and I passed by here in May of 1853 in my search for a more salutary homestead. Then again, in July of 1853, I crossed over with my ox team, and I've lived here in the Commonwealth of Washington ever since, and indeed, even before it became a separate territory. And perhaps that is why I will feel it more keenly than many others if this work should fail of accomplishment. As I've said, I believe we pioneers are entitled to a front seat, although few are left, and to have even the name they crave of their track taken from them will bring a deep feeling of mortification not easily forgotten. And so, ladies, I ask you to join me in this endeavor. And for giving me this opportunity, I thank you.
Thank you very much, Ezra Meeker. And now, the grand finale, we are going to re-unveil the monument. So would Senator Fraser and Susie Scuderi, and we have Julia, and Helena and Layla. Would you please go to the monument? We don't want to call it a rock, but that's what it is. And if you've been in the Olympia area, please don't leave yet, because we're all going to sing My Country, 'Tis of Thee as soon as this is accomplished in their backs. So you'll notice that the rock is draped with a blue cloth, and on your program you see an American flag. Well, in the past 100 years, some flag protocol has been put together, and it is now no longer considered flag etiquette to put an American flag over a monument such as this. So that's why that was done. So direct your eyes there, but don't leave yet, because we need you to help sing My Country, 'Tis of Thee. So, and then right after that. So, all right, the unveiling will occur. I've got to take the mic off myself so I can look the other direction. And remember, if you haven't registered as a pioneer, be sure to make sure you do that before you leave the park, because we want your name and be able to find you so we can stay in touch. All right, let's hear it. It is unveiled. The monument that we've been walking by for the last however long you've been here. Now we'll have our folks come on back here as soon as that's maybe a picture or two is taken. Have we got the, is it undraped? Yeah, it is. Sure it is. All right. And about a week ago, they cleaned the rock all up. I mean, it was, I saw people scrubbing it down. So it's nice and clean and ready for fresh fingerprints. And when you take a look at it or get yourself, have a photograph taken of yourself standing in front of the rock, notice how it says Olympia WN instead of WA. So that's the way Washington was abbreviated back then. That was in a long time ago. Okay. All right, they're running back. The kids are, anyway. And we're going to be inviting them to sing America. And you're invited to join in, would you please, on this? And then don't run away right fast, because I have some closing remarks I want to make to you. Okay. Are you ready? Getting there. All right. And let's all just kind of join in and sing with them once they get going. Let's go. We're ready. Thank you very much. And before I let you go, I want, Shirley, we have some flowers for you. Shirley Sterling put this event together, and it was hugely successful. Shirley, there are some flowers here somewhere for you. No, there they are. So Shirley Sterling, thank you so much. And I want to thank the Boomer Brass for their wonderful performance. Thanks, Shirley. You just did a remarkable thing. Want to remind all DAR folks to stick around for pictures, and be sure, if you have not signed up yet, there's a table there. Want to get your names. And thanks to the Boomer Brass, Don Bedlington on the trumpet, Judd Etzel. Just found out that Judd Etzel has many prominent ancestors in our area. Judd, raise your hand so they know which one is you. Your grandmother was a regent of Sacajawea chapter DAR, and his great-grandfather was the founder of the Washington National Guard and the 11th mayor of Olympia. Also, members of the Boomer Brass, Gail Frost on the French horn, Bob Wharton on the tuba, and Dwight Bergquist Moody on the trombone. Big hand for the Boomer Brass band. Thank you very much. And thank you for being here. Did we forget anything, Shirley? I think we're all... Oh.
I do want to say one quick thing. Excuse me. This would not have been possible without the hard work and very dedicated group of women who made up our committee. Would Carol Gann and Julia and Ann Shipley is not here today. Who am I forgetting? And of course Della Stenstrom. Would you ladies all stand? And of course, Shirley Sterling. We started this project in January, and originally we were looking at just restoring the monument, and it turned into an event such as this. And I have to tell you, this would not have happened without the devotion of these women. Carol comes from Enumclaw, and she drives here every time we have a meeting. But this was the brainchild of Shirley Sterling, and without her being able to put this together, that wouldn't have come alive for us. So Shirley, I really want to thank you for all of your hard work. So thank you very much.
Thank you, and thank you for coming on this beautiful day, and thanks for bringing good weather with you. Thank you so very much, honored guests and everyone. Thank you so much. And Music Delight, Robert Bonham, thank you. Good job. We go back a long, long way. So thanks for being here. And don't forget to meet Lila Jones. She's still here. Thanks, folks.